What happens when the one person a narcissist underestimates, the empath, finally decides to fight back? Not with cruelty, but with the narcissist's own strategies. Imagine the shock on the manipulator's face when their games no longer work, when silence meets silence, when gaslighting bounces back, and when control suddenly slips through their fingers. Most people believe empaths are always the victims, always the ones who bend, forgive, and absorb the pain. But what if I told you that the moment an empath learns to flip the script, the entire power dynamic shatters? In this video, we're diving deep into what really happens when the tables turn. And trust me, it's not what the narcissist expects. By the end, you'll see why this shift doesn't just protect the empath, but actually exposes the narcissist's greatest weakness. So stay with me until the end, because the last point will change the way you look at every narcissist you've ever met. And hey, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Would you ever use a narcissist's own playbook against them? Don't forget to subscribe, because what you'll learn here will make sure you never fall into their trap again. There comes a moment in the life of an empath when something inside of them quietly but powerfully changes. For years, they may have been the giver, the listener, the one who absorbed the heavy storms of manipulation, cruelty, and emotional games. They learned to endure the silent treatments, the gaslighting, the endless criticism, all because their heart believed in love, compassion, and understanding. But the truth is, even the most patient soul has a breaking point, not of weakness, but of awakening. One day, the empath begins to notice the patterns. The lies are no longer invisible. The cycles are no longer hidden. The empath sees with clarity, and in that moment, the balance of power shifts. Instead of reacting with pain, they start responding with silence. Instead of questioning themselves, they begin to question the manipulator. And for the first time, the narcissist sees a reflection of their own tactics staring them back. This shift is subtle, but it is earth-shattering for the narcissist. They are used to the empath playing the role of healer, the one who bends and forgives, the one who tries to keep the peace, no matter how much it costs them. But now, the peace is gone. The empath is no longer trying to fix what was never theirs to fix. They have decided to match the narcissist's strategies with awareness, not cruelty. When the narcissist goes silent, the empath does not chase. When the narcissist gaslights, the empath calmly holds up the truth. When the narcissist tries to provoke a reaction, the empath offers nothing but calm indifference. And suddenly, the very games that once gave the narcissist power begin to crumble in their hands. Imagine a predator who has always hunted the same way, confident that their prey would never fight back. Now, imagine that prey turns and uses the same hunting strategies, not to destroy, but to survive. The predator is thrown into chaos because their advantage has disappeared. This is exactly what happens in the unexpected shift. The narcissist, who once believed they had complete control, is now caught off guard. They don't know how to function when their manipulations are mirrored back at them. Their power begins to slip, and for the first time, they taste the very confusion and frustration they once fed to the empath. The empath, however, is not becoming a narcissist. That's an important truth to hold on to. This is not about cruelty or revenge. It is about reflection and strength. It is about showing the narcissist that the old patterns no longer work, that the supply they once drained so easily has now dried up. The empath rises, not as a victim, but as someone who has learned to protect their own soul. And in that rise, something remarkable happens. The narcissist begins to see their own darkness mirrored back at them, and it terrifies them. That is the unexpected shift, the moment when the empath steps out of the shadows and into their power, leaving the narcissist trembling in the light of their own reflection.
Silence can be louder than any argument, sharper than any insult, and more powerful than any explanation. For a narcissist, silence is one of their favorite tools. They use it to punish, to control, and to keep the empath walking on eggshells, desperate to restore peace. They know the empath's heart cannot tolerate distance, disconnection, or coldness, so they withhold their presence like oxygen, leaving the empath gasping in confusion. But what the narcissist never expects is that one day, the empath will stop chasing that oxygen. One day, the empath learns to sit in silence too, and that silence, mirrored back, becomes a weapon more devastating than any outburst could ever be. When the empath stops reacting, something shifts in the very foundation of the narcissist's control. The narcissist thrives on emotional reactions, the tears, the frustration, the endless explanations. Those reactions are food to them, proof that they still have influence. But when the empath chooses silence, when they refuse to argue or beg for attention, the narcissist is left with nothing to feed on. It is as if the stage they built for themselves suddenly has no audience, no spotlight, no applause. They stand there, waiting for the performance to begin, only to realize the show is over and no one is watching anymore. This kind of silence is not weakness, it is strength. It is the empath finally understanding that not every attack deserves an answer, and not every manipulation deserves energy. Instead of explaining themselves endlessly, instead of trying to prove their worth, the empath learns that silence itself is a statement that says, "I no longer play by your rules." That silence becomes a mirror, forcing the narcissist to sit in the emptiness they once used as a weapon. And here lies the irony. The narcissist can dish out silence, but they cannot endure it when it is given back to them. They crumble under the very void they created because their survival depends on being seen, heard, and felt. The empath's silence unsettles them in ways words never could. It triggers their deepest fears of abandonment and irrelevance. They start to question their grip on control, wondering if they are losing their influence. And in many ways, they are. Because the empath has finally discovered that silence can heal. Silence can protect. Silence can expose. While the narcissist grows restless and desperate for attention, the empath is reclaiming peace, building inner strength, and breaking the cycle of endless reaction. This is why silence, when chosen with intention, becomes a weapon, not of destruction, but of liberation. It liberates the empath from the exhausting role of pleaser and rescuer. It liberates them from the illusion that they must explain themselves to be worthy. And it leaves the narcissist trapped in the one thing they cannot stand, their own emptiness. That is the true power of silence. It doesn't just protect the empath. It dismantles the narcissist's illusion of control, one quiet moment at a time. For so long, the empath has been the one with open doors to their heart, their time, their energy, and their forgiveness. Narcissists know this, and that is why they choose empaths as their prime target. They sense the endless supply of understanding, the willingness to bend, and the inability to walk away without trying just one more time. But there comes a turning point when the empath finally understands that compassion without boundaries is self-destruction. And when that understanding sets in, something powerful is born. Boundaries that do not just protect, but that bite back. These boundaries are not walls built out of bitterness. They are shields built out of wisdom. When the empath enforces strong boundaries, the narcissist's familiar tactics begin to fail. The guilt trips no longer land. The manipulation loses its spark. The constant invasions into their time, their emotions, and even their personal space suddenly have nowhere to go. It is like trying to break into a house where every door has been locked, every window sealed. The narcissist is left outside, pounding on walls they once walked through with ease. And in that frustration, their mask begins to crack. They reveal their desperation because the easy supply they counted on has been cut off at the root. For the empath, setting these boundaries feels uncomfortable at first. They are not used to saying no. They are not used to watching someone rage or sulk without rushing in to soothe the storm. But each time they hold the line, each time they protect their space, they grow stronger. They learn that boundaries are not about pushing people away. They are about honoring their own worth. And when the narcissist pushes against those lines, the empath's refusal to bend becomes a lesson the narcissist cannot ignore. Boundaries force the narcissist to face themselves. Without easy access to the empath's energy, they are confronted with the emptiness of their own. Without control, they are exposed for who they truly are, someone who cannot survive without feeding off others. The more the empath stands firm, the more the narcissist unravels. Anger, confusion, and panic take over because the usual invasion tactics collapse under the weight of those boundaries. What once worked without effort now meets resistance, and that resistance bites harder than any words could ever be. This is the moment the empath realizes the true power of boundaries. They do not just protect the heart, they redefine the relationship. They shift the balance of power. They remind the narcissist that they are no longer dealing with someone who will endlessly give without question. And most importantly, they remind the empath of their own strength, that their love and compassion are valuable, and not everyone deserves access to them.
Gaslighting is one of the narcissist's sharpest weapons. It's the art of twisting reality until the empath begins to question their own memory, their own perception, even their own sanity. A simple truth becomes blurred. A clear memory becomes all in your head. Slowly, the empath learns to doubt themselves and depend on the narcissist's version of reality, even when it feels wrong. This tactic works as long as the empath remains unsure, as long as they carry that seed of self-doubt. But the day the empath wakes up, the day they see the patterns and trust their own mind again, gaslighting loses its grip. And not only does it lose its power, but the empath begins to turn it back on the one who created it. Instead of falling into confusion, the empath starts asking calm, precise questions. "Didn't you say something different last time? If that's true, then why did this happen?" These questions are not shouted in anger. They are delivered in a steady voice with clear confidence. And that is what makes them so powerful. The narcissist, who once relied on the empath's emotional reaction, now faces logical contradictions they cannot explain away. Their lies, once buried under chaos, are suddenly exposed under the spotlight of reason. This reversal is devastating for the narcissist. They thrive in confusion, but they collapse when forced into clarity. The empath is no longer tangled in their illusions. Instead, the narcissist is the one stumbling over their own words, caught in contradictions they cannot escape. Their usual trick, accusing the empath of being too sensitive or making things up, falls flat when the empath refuses to doubt themselves. The tables turn, and the manipulator becomes the one lost in the very fog they created. The beauty of this shift lies in the empath's calmness. Gaslighting depends on emotion. It counts on the victim becoming flustered, upset, and desperate to defend themselves. But when the empath stays centered, when they no longer feel the need to prove every detail, the game is over. They don't have to fight with fire. They just have to hold on to their truth and watch as the narcissist burns in the flames of their own contradictions. For the empath, this moment is liberating. They finally understand that their memory, their intuition, and their perception were never broken. They were simply under attack. Reclaiming that trust in themselves is like reclaiming their freedom. And for the narcissist, it is unbearable. Because nothing terrifies them more than exposure. Gaslighting was their shield, their camouflage. But now, with the empath flipping the tactic, that shield shatters, leaving them vulnerable and revealed. This is the power of flipping the gaslight. The manipulator who once made others doubt reality now drowns in the reality of their own lies. The empath no longer bends to illusion, no longer shrinks under confusion. Instead, they rise with clarity. And in that clarity, the narcissist finds themselves cornered, tangled in a web they spun for everyone else, but now caught in it alone. Indifference is one of the hardest lessons for an empath to learn. For so long, their nature has been to feel deeply, to care fully, and to pour themselves into others without measure. They thrive on connection, on making others feel seen, on healing wounds no one else bothers to notice. And it is precisely this boundless empathy that narcissists prey upon. To the narcissist, the empath's emotions are like fuel. The joy, the tears, the frustration, the endless attempts to explain. Every reaction feeds them. Every response proves their power. But the day an empath learns to master indifference, the game changes in ways the narcissist cannot survive. Because for a narcissist, there is nothing more threatening than being starved of the very energy that keeps them alive. At first, indifference feels unnatural to the empath. Silence used to ache. Distance used to feel like punishment. Ignoring a text, walking away from an argument, refusing to explain themselves again, it once felt cold and unkind, like betraying their own nature. But then they realized something profound. Indifference is not cruelty, it is clarity. It is the understanding that not every battle is worth fighting, not every manipulation is worth answering, and not every demand deserves their energy. Indifference is not about turning off love, it is about turning off supply. And for the narcissist, that supply is everything. The narcissist thrives on emotional chaos. If they can make you angry, they feel powerful. If they can make you cry, they feel in control. If they can make you question yourself, they feel superior. But when the empath responds with calm indifference, all of that collapses. The anger no longer erupts, the tears no longer flow, the endless explanations no longer come. The narcissist shouts into a void, but the void doesn't echo back. They attempt to provoke, but the fire no longer burns. And what is left is a silence that suffocates them, a stillness that exposes just how powerless they are without someone feeding their ego.
The beauty of indifference is that it flips the entire dynamic. The narcissist has always counted on being the one in control, the one who sets the emotional temperature of the room. But when the empath refuses to react, the narcissist loses that control. They become desperate, scrambling for new ways to provoke a response. They may escalate their tactics, shouting louder, withdrawing further, or even trying to play the victim. But the empath, steady in their indifference, refuses to take the bait.
They understand now that every reaction is currency, and they will no longer spend themselves on someone who only sees them as fuel. This terrifies the narcissist because indifference is not something they can manipulate. Anger they can twist. Sadness they can exploit. Even joy they can drain. But indifference? Indifference leaves them with nothing. It is like trying to light a fire without oxygen. No matter how many sparks they strike, nothing catches. The narcissist, once so sure of their power, begins to feel their control slipping through their fingers. And with that loss of control comes panic, because the one thing they cannot stand is irrelevance. For the empath, indifference is not just a defense, it is a liberation. It is the moment they finally realize that their peace is more valuable than the narcissist's chaos. It is the decision to stop dancing to someone else's music and start walking to the rhythm of their own heart. Indifference does not mean they stop feeling, but it means they stop pouring their feelings into a bottomless pit. It means they save their compassion for those who can appreciate it, and they save their energy for those who will honor it. Over time, this power of indifference changes everything. The empath is no longer chained to the cycle of highs and lows, of love bombing and devaluation, of punishment and reconciliation. They no longer live at the mercy of the narcissist's moods. Instead, they find peace in stillness, strength in silence, and freedom in walking away. And for the narcissist, this is the ultimate defeat, because their survival depends on reaction, and without it, they are forced to sit in the emptiness they always tried to escape. This is why indifference is more powerful than anger, more final than confrontation. Anger keeps the connection alive. Confrontation keeps the game going, but indifference ends it. It is the closing of a door, the turning of a page, the quiet statement that says, "You no longer matter here." The narcissist can rage, they can plead, they can try every trick in their playbook, but the empath has stepped out of reach, and in that step, the power shifts forever. So the power of indifference is not about revenge, nor is it about becoming cold-hearted. It is about reclaiming control, protecting peace, and refusing to give energy to what no longer serves the soul. For the empath, it is the beginning of freedom. For the narcissist, it is the beginning of the end. Because without reaction, without supply, without someone to play their endless games with, the narcissist is left with the one thing they fear most: themselves. The most unsettling experience for a narcissist is to meet their own reflection, and not the kind they see in the mirror when they're admiring themselves, but the reflection that comes from another person quietly holding up their behavior for them to see. Empaths, by nature, have always been mirrors. They absorb emotions, reflect moods, and carry the weight of others' feelings as if those feelings were their own. This quality makes them deeply compassionate, but it also makes them vulnerable, because narcissists exploit this gift like an open door. Yet when the empath wakes up, when they decide to stop absorbing and start reflecting, everything changes. Suddenly, the narcissist comes face to face with themselves, stripped of illusions, and it's a sight they cannot stand. In the past, the empath's warmth met the narcissist's coldness. Every insult was met with forgiveness. Every silent treatment was answered with a desperate attempt to reconnect. Every manipulation was swallowed in the name of keeping peace. But when the empath finally flips the script, something remarkable happens. They no longer respond with endless warmth. Instead, they give back the same coldness, the same distance, the same disregard that was once used against them. For the first time, the narcissist feels their own tactics staring back at them, and it is unbearable. The narcissist thrives on control. They survive by projecting their emptiness onto others and watching those others twist in confusion. But when the empath mirrors that emptiness back, the narcissist is forced to confront what they've been running from all along: themselves. The silence they once used as punishment now returns to them, leaving them restless and agitated. The dismissiveness they once used to diminish the empath now ricochets back, making them feel small and unseen. The indifference they once wielded as a weapon now cuts them deeply, because it reveals the truth they try so hard to hide, that beneath the mask of superiority lies a desperate need for attention, validation, and control. The mirror effect is powerful not because the empath becomes cruel, but because they become still. They stop over-explaining, stop overreacting, stop over-giving. They hold up a mirror with their behavior, saying, "This is what you've shown me. Do you like it?" And the narcissist, who has spent their life avoiding their own emptiness, is suddenly forced to look into it. They do not like what they see. In fact, they despise it, because deep down, the narcissist already knows the truth, that their games are hollow, that their love is conditional, and that their power is fragile. But seeing that truth reflected back at them by someone they once controlled makes it undeniable. For the empath, this is not about revenge. It is not about becoming like the narcissist. It is about balance. It is about no longer pouring light into a black hole, no longer giving compassion where there is only exploitation. The mirror effect is the empath's way of saying, "I see you, and I will not lose myself to your emptiness anymore." It's a turning point where the empath realizes that reflection is more powerful than reaction, because reaction feeds the narcissist, but reflection starves them. The narcissist, of course, will not take this quietly. They may grow angry, accusing the empath of being cold, distant, or unkind. They may play the victim, trying to guilt the empath back into their old role of caretaker. They may escalate their games, desperate to shatter the mirror that's being held up to them. But none of it works if the empath stays grounded, because once the empath stops absorbing and starts reflecting, the narcissist loses the one thing they cannot function without: the illusion of control. The beauty of the mirror effect is that it exposes the truth without a single word. It forces the narcissist to sit in the reality of their own emptiness, their own manipulation, their own cruelty. And this exposure is something they cannot handle, because it strips away the mask they wear not only for others, but for themselves. They hate it because it reminds them of what they've always tried to escape, that deep down, without manipulation, without control, without someone to fuel them, they are nothing more than a fragile ego, desperate for survival. For the empath, embracing the mirror effect is a kind of rebirth. They realize that they no longer need to chase validation or approval. They no longer need to prove their worth through endless sacrifice. By simply reflecting back what they are given, they take themselves out of the game. They stop being the stage on which the narcissist performs, and in doing so, they reclaim their power. They discover that true strength doesn't always roar. It sometimes whispers, "I will not play along anymore." In the end, the mirror effect is both the narcissist's downfall and the empath's liberation. The narcissist cannot survive looking into themselves, but the empath cannot survive without finally showing that reflection. It is the moment the roles reverse. The manipulator becomes the one trapped in confusion, and the empath becomes the one standing in clarity.
And while the narcissist may hate the mirror, the empath learns to love it because it is the mirror that sets them free.
For the narcissist, manipulation is their favorite weapon. It is the invisible thread they use to control, confuse, and dominate. They craft words like spells, twist stories like seasoned playwrights, and create illusions so convincing that even the most self-aware person can stumble. For years, the empath falls into these traps, not because they are weak, but because they care. Their heart is open, their compassion deep, and their desire to understand blinds them to the predator's games. But eventually, something changes. Patterns begin to repeat themselves. The narcissist uses the same accusations, the same tactics of silent treatment, gaslighting, or sudden rage, only to later disguise it with charm. At first, the empath bends over backwards to fix it, believing that love and patience can heal the cracks. Yet the more they try, the more the narcissist tightens their grip. Then comes the turning point: awareness. The empath begins to notice the cycles. They see the rehearsed nature of the attacks, the predictability of the tantrums, the way the narcissist thrives when the empath is unsettled. And instead of reacting in pain or confusion, the empath decides to pause. They do something unexpected. They watch, they listen, and they play along, just enough to let the narcissist believe the trap is working. The narcissist sets the stage. Maybe it's a lie twisted into half-truths, or a rumor planted to isolate the empath from others. Maybe it's a sudden accusation meant to provoke an emotional defense. They wait eagerly, expecting the usual flood of tears, protests, or desperate explanations. But instead, the empath gives nothing. No frantic energy, no desperate attempt to convince, just calm, deliberate silence. This silence is not weakness, it is power. The empath has learned the art of observation. Every word the narcissist speaks, every gesture they make is now being studied, measured, and understood. For the first time, the manipulator feels the discomfort of being under the microscope. The stage they once dominated is no longer theirs alone. Then comes the moment when the trap backfires. The empath, still composed, turns the game around. Maybe they ask a simple, piercing question, one that exposes the contradiction in the narcissist's story. Maybe they mirror back the narcissist's coldness, reflecting it so clearly that the manipulator catches a glimpse of their own emptiness. Or maybe, in front of others, the empath allows the narcissist to speak just long enough for their lies to reveal themselves. Whatever the method, the outcome is the same. The spotlight shifts. The narcissist, who once thrived in the shadows of secrecy and confusion, suddenly finds themselves exposed. Their intentions are no longer hidden. Their schemes unravel in real time, and for the first time, they feel the sting of vulnerability. The control they worked so hard to maintain slips through their fingers, because manipulation only works when the victim participates, and the empath has stepped out of the game. To the narcissist, this is devastating. Their entire identity depends on control. Without it, they feel naked, weak, and terrified. They may lash out, trying to reassert dominance with anger or threats. But even that no longer lands the same way. The empath, steady and unshaken, no longer absorbs the venom. They see it for what it is, a performance, an act, a desperate attempt to regain what has already been lost. And herein lies the greatest irony. Manipulation backfires because it reveals the manipulator. When the empath refuses to play, the narcissist's mask cracks. Their lies are no longer convincing. Their charm no longer sparkles. Their power no longer frightens. What remains is their truth, an insecure, empty being who feeds on others because they cannot sustain themselves. And though the narcissist may rage at this exposure, deep down, they know they have been caught in their own web. For the empath, this backfire is not about revenge. It is about freedom. No longer bound by the need for approval, no longer enslaved by the desire to fix or explain, the empath steps into a new realm of strength. Their silence speaks louder than any argument ever could. Their calmness cuts deeper than any outburst. By refusing to give energy to the manipulator, they reclaim what was always theirs: their peace, their clarity, their dignity. This transformation terrifies the narcissist because it proves something they never wanted to believe. The empath was never weak. The empath's compassion was not a flaw. It was a gift. And once combined with awareness, that gift becomes the very force that destroys manipulation. In the end, manipulation always backfires because it is unsustainable. Lies require constant maintenance. Control demands endless energy. But truth, once awakened, needs nothing to survive. And when the empath aligns themselves with truth, they become untouchable. The narcissist will try again, of course. They will attempt new tricks, new disguises, new manipulations. But once the empath has seen the pattern, the illusion is broken forever. And though the narcissist may flail in anger, the empath has already walked away, free, stronger, and wiser than before. Because the most powerful move an empath can make is not to beat the narcissist at their own game. It is to refuse to play, and in doing so, watch as the entire game collapses in on itself. And that is what happens when manipulation backfires.
There comes a moment in the empath's journey when the old patterns no longer fit, when the weight of constantly yielding, explaining, and proving becomes too heavy to carry. For years, the empath may have been conditioned to comply, to bend their will in order to avoid conflict, to accept blame even when it was undeserved, and to live in the shadows of someone else's criticism. The narcissist thrived on this compliance, using it as fertile soil to plant seeds of control, dominance, and manipulation. Every time the empath shrank, the narcissist grew stronger. Every time the empath doubted themselves, the narcissist fed off that insecurity. But then something shifts, something profound. The empath, instead of shrinking, begins to stand tall. They no longer respond to harsh words with trembling silence, nor do they seek validation from the very person who seeks to tear them down. They meet criticism with calm, steady confidence, and this single change rattles the narcissist more than any argument ever could. Confidence, after all, is the language the narcissist does not expect from their target. They anticipate weakness, hesitation, and the familiar eagerness to please. But when the empath no longer plays that role, the narcissist feels the ground shifting beneath their feet. Their carefully constructed house of control begins to wobble. Suddenly, the weapon of criticism, a weapon they've sharpened and used endlessly, loses its power. Because confidence does not argue, it does not beg, and it does not apologize for existing. Confidence stands firm, rooted in truth. And truth is the one force the narcissist cannot twist, no matter how hard they try. The empath's bold self-assurance does more than protect. It disrupts. It shatters the manipulative cycle in which the narcissist thrives. Instead of entering into endless explanations, the empath might simply respond with, "I know who I am, and I stand by my choices." No anger, No pleading, just certainty. And this certainty becomes unbearable for the narcissist. Why? Because their control has always depended on insecurity, on planting doubts, on convincing the empath that they are not enough. But when the empath refuses to swallow those lies, the narcissist finds themselves starving for fuel. This newfound confidence also changes the dynamic on a deeper level. The empath no longer chases approval, they generate it from within. They no longer measure their worth by the narcissist's shifting standards, but by their own self-respect. This shift creates a ripple effect. Arguments that once lasted for hours now fall flat in seconds. Insults that once pierced like arrows now bounce off harmlessly. The narcissist can hurl every tactic they know, but against confidence, those tactics collapse. It is like trying to control a wildfire with a handful of sand. It simply cannot be done. And the beauty of confidence is that it does not need to be loud or aggressive. It is quiet strength. It is the ability to hold eye contact without fear. It is the power of saying no without guilt. It is the refusal to internalize the venom of someone else's words. The narcissist who expects tears or frantic explanations is met instead with a calm presence that says, "Without words, you no longer control me." This silent declaration is more threatening to the narcissist than any shouted accusation could ever be. The empath's transformation is not born of arrogance, it is born of survival. After enduring endless cycles of belittlement, they learn that compliance does not protect them, it only deepens the wound. But confidence, true confidence, creates a shield. It creates distance. It creates the kind of inner strength that cannot be dismantled by external attacks. When the empath embraces this strength, they become untouchable. Not because the narcissist stops trying, but because the attempts no longer penetrate. For the narcissist, this is devastating. Their usual playbook, criticism, manipulation, intimidation, suddenly feels useless. They begin to stumble, to scramble for new tactics, to push harder in desperation. But the harder they push, the more obvious their weakness becomes. Because what the empath has realized is simple. Criticism only has power if you believe it. And once you stop believing it, the spell is broken. In this way, confidence becomes the ultimate rebellion. It is not loud, not violent, not dramatic. It is subtle, steady, and unshakable. It is the empath finally recognizing their worth and refusing to surrender it. And for the narcissist, this is the one thing they cannot tolerate. A supply source that no longer bows down, no longer shrinks, no longer hands over control. So the empath continues forward, not with anger, not with revenge, but with clarity. They understand that they do not need to win the narcissist's approval, nor do they need to prove themselves against false accusations. Their value is not up for debate. Their life is not defined by someone else's opinion. And as this realization deepens, the narcissist's grip loosens until there is nothing left to hold on to. This is the power of confidence over compliance. It is the moment the empath rises above the old patterns, breaking the chains that once kept them small. It is the quiet but undeniable truth that strength does not come from pleasing others. It comes from believing in yourself. And once the empath embodies this truth, the narcissist can no longer hold power over them. The cycle breaks, the game ends, and the empath, once the quiet sufferer, walks away, not as a victim, but as someone unshakably whole.
There comes a moment in every empath's journey where exhaustion turns into wisdom. For years, they gave and gave, pouring out their energy, their love, their understanding, believing that one day the narcissist would change. They explained themselves endlessly. They begged to be seen. They chased after validation that never arrived. Each time, the narcissist dangled approval like bait, only to snatch it away when it mattered most. But then, something shifts. The empath begins to realize that no matter how much they explain, the narcissist isn't listening. No matter how much they love, the narcissist will not return it in the same way. No matter how much they chase, the narcissist will always run just a little faster, keeping them on a leash of false hope. And so, with a heavy but determined heart, the empath makes a different choice: silence, distance, and most of all, withdrawal. Strategic withdrawal isn't about giving up. It isn't about weakness. It is the strongest, most courageous act an empath can make. Because instead of feeding the narcissist's insatiable hunger for attention, the empath begins to starve it. The manipulator, who once thrived on drama and reaction, suddenly finds nothing to feed on. Where there was once tears, there is calm. Where there was pleading, there is peace. Where there was endless explaining, there is only quiet strength. At first, the narcissist doesn't believe it. They think it's just another test, another performance, another way to pull them back in. So they poke, they prod, they try every trick: provocation, guilt, rage, silent treatment of their own. But the empath, now awake, does not flinch. They no longer chase, they no longer beg, they no longer attempt to prove their worth to someone who will never see it. And this silence, this detachment, this withdrawal is unbearable to the narcissist. Because a narcissist cannot survive without an audience. They need eyes on them, energy poured into them, reactions that make them feel alive. But when the empath takes all that energy back, redirecting it inward toward healing, self-love, and peace, the narcissist begins to wither. Their power shrinks. Their games collapse. Their false mask starts to slip. The empath, for the first time, begins to feel free. It doesn't mean the narcissist disappears overnight. In fact, they may fight harder, turning up their manipulations, promising change, or lashing out in cruelty. But the empath has learned a secret truth. The less they respond, the more powerless the narcissist becomes. Strategic withdrawal teaches the empath that their silence is louder than their words, that their distance is stronger than their arguments, that their refusal to engage is the greatest revenge they could ever give. Because nothing terrifies a narcissist more than losing control, and nothing exposes their weakness more than realizing they can no longer control the one who used to bend at their every word. So the empath walks away, not always physically, but emotionally, spiritually, energetically. They reclaim their light. They take back their attention, their validation, their care, and they redirect it to where it always should have been: themselves. And in that sacred withdrawal, something beautiful is born. The empath discovers peace where there used to be chaos. They discover clarity where there used to be confusion. They discover strength where there used to be self-doubt. And the narcissist? They are left alone with their own emptiness, forced to face the void they've tried so hard to fill with other people's energy. This is the silent victory of the empath. Not through fighting, not through explaining, not through endless battles, but through the simple, powerful choice
of no longer giving their energy away. Strategic withdrawal is not escape. It is empowerment. It is the moment the empath realizes, I am no longer your fuel. I am no longer your supply. I am no longer under your control. And once that decision is made, the narcissist can never win again.
At first, the narcissist believes they have the upper hand. They always do. With their arsenal of silent treatments, gaslighting, blame shifting, and triangulation, they weave a web of control around their chosen target. To them, the empath is the perfect stage: kind, giving, forgiving, and patient. Every outburst, every manipulation, every cold withdrawal feels like a test the empath will bend under. And for a time, it works. The empath doubts themselves, questions their worth, and bends backward just to keep peace. But there comes a moment when something shifts. The empath begins to notice the cracks. The lies no longer sound smooth. The contradictions pile up. The silent treatments no longer sting as they once did, because silence starts to feel like freedom. The triangulation, those games where the narcissist pits one person against another, begins to look childish and transparent. What once created confusion now only creates clarity. This is the turning point. The illusion of control begins to unravel. The narcissist thrives on reaction. They need the pleading, the explaining, the tears, the desperate attempts to win back affection. Without these, their power shrinks. And when the empath finally refuses to play the part of the victim, it is as if the narcissist has been disarmed. Gaslighting, once their sharpest weapon, dulls. The empath no longer argues endlessly about what really happened. Instead, they smile calmly, sometimes not responding at all. They know the truth inside their own heart, and that truth cannot be taken away. The narcissist shouts louder, twists harder, but it falls on ears that no longer bend to the story. The silent treatment, once unbearable, loses its edge. Where before the empath would chase, apologize, or beg for reconciliation, now they use that silence to rest, to heal, to reconnect with themselves. What was meant as punishment becomes a gift. The narcissist cannot comprehend this reversal. They sit in their own silence, stewing in frustration, because the attention they crave does not return. Triangulation, too, loses its poison. The empath begins to see through the strategy of bringing in a third person, whether it's an ex, a friend, or a stranger, to provoke jealousy or insecurity. Instead of reacting with fear or comparison, the empath shrugs. If that's what you want, then take it, their silence says. Nothing terrifies the narcissist more than realizing their games no longer provoke a reaction. The more the empath detaches, the more frantic the narcissist becomes. Control is their lifeline. Without it, they unravel. Every tactic that once worked so flawlessly begins to backfire. What was once power now becomes weakness. The empath's refusal to engage forces the narcissist to face something they avoid at all costs: their own emptiness. And this emptiness is unbearable. The narcissist cannot sit in silence with themselves. They cannot live without supply. They need reaction the way lungs need air. When they are denied this reaction, they suffocate in their own void. That is the destruction of the illusion, the realization that their power was never real, it was only borrowed. They never controlled the empath. They only controlled the empath's willingness to respond. The day the empath refuses to give that response, the empire of manipulation crumbles. The narcissist may rage, screaming accusations, desperate to provoke. They may swing to charm, offering sudden affection or promises of change. They may cycle rapidly through tactics, trying one after another, praying for a crack in the empath's armor. But the empath, having tasted freedom, no longer falls. Their calmness becomes unshakable. And here lies the true victory. Not in fighting the narcissist back with equal cruelty, not in proving them wrong with endless debates, but in destroying the illusion that they ever had control. By simply refusing to play, the empath wins. The narcissist is left facing themselves, stripped of masks, exposed in the harsh light of reality. For the first time, they are forced to reckon with a truth they cannot manipulate. Their control was only ever an illusion, and illusions cannot survive in the presence of truth. The empath, once a prisoner of their games, walks away, not as a victim, but as someone who has reclaimed their power. Their silence, their boundaries, their refusal to be moved, all serve as a mirror the narcissist cannot bear to look into. This is how the illusion dies. The narcissist thought they held the strings, but the moment the empath stops dancing, the strings fall useless to the floor. And in that moment, the narcissist's greatest fear comes true. They are powerless.
There comes a moment in every toxic dynamic when the balance of power begins to shift. For so long, the narcissist has relied on their familiar playbook: gaslighting, projection, silent treatments, triangulation, guilt trips, and carefully planted seeds of doubt. These tactics worked flawlessly on the empath because the empath's nature is to trust, to love, to give the benefit of the doubt. For months, years, maybe even decades, the narcissist thrived on this dynamic, confident that their control could never be challenged. But then, something happens. Slowly, quietly, and almost invisibly, the empath begins to awaken. What once confused them now makes sense. What once wounded them now teaches them. And when that awakening comes, the narcissist begins to sense something they have never truly felt before in this relationship: fear. At first, the fear is subtle. The narcissist notices that their words don't sting the way they used to. They deliver their usual criticism: "You're too sensitive, you're imagining things, you'll never find anyone better than me." But instead of tears, silence, or frantic reassurance, they're met with calm eyes. A quiet confidence radiates back at them. And that is where the panic begins to flicker. Small at first, but undeniable. You see, the narcissist thrives on emotional reaction. It feeds on it, whether positive or negative. The anger, the crying, the desperate attempts to explain, all of it provides fuel. But when the empath no longer dances to that tune, the narcissist feels the ground slipping beneath their feet. Their illusion of dominance cracks, and nothing terrifies a narcissist more than losing control. That's when the panic begins to show in their behavior. The once calculated manipulator starts to lose their composure. They raise their voice more often. They double down on lies that make little sense. They try the silent treatment, but instead of the empath chasing after them with pleas, they are met with complete indifference. Silence that once felt powerful now feels like emptiness. The narcissist cannot stand it. In desperation, they begin to escalate. Rage erupts suddenly out of nowhere because deep down they know their grip is slipping. They may even attempt to stage dramatic scenes, creating chaos in hopes of pulling the empath back into the role of the rescuer. But this time, the empath doesn't fall into the trap. They watch. They detach. They see the manipulation clearly for what it is. And that clarity is deadly to the narcissist's control. Because once the empath sees the game can never be unseen. Now the narcissist panics harder. They begin to feel exposed, as though someone is holding a mirror to their face. And in that reflection, they see the hollowness of their tactics. The grand mask they wore for so long begins to slip. The charm doesn't charm anymore. The threats don't intimidate anymore. The victim stories don't elicit sympathy anymore. This is when the narcissist's panic turns into full-blown desperation. They may scramble to hoover, suddenly offering affection, apologies, or promises of change. They may paint themselves as the victim, telling anyone who will listen that the empath has changed or become cold. They will project their panic outward because to admit they are losing control is too terrifying to bear. But inside, the storm rages. The narcissist begins to realize that the empath they once depended on for fuel is no longer a source. They are losing their supply, and this realization is like oxygen being cut off. It is in this space that the narcissist's true nature is revealed. Stripped of their tools, their composure, their mask, what remains is raw desperation. They panic because they no longer hold the strings. They panic because the script has been rewritten. They panic because the empath, once the easiest target, has become the one who sees them entirely. And this panic is not just about losing control over one person. It is about the existential threat it represents. If the empath can awaken and break free, then the narcissist's entire illusion of power is at risk. Their identity depends on control. Without it, they are left face to face with their greatest fear, their own emptiness. So, they panic. They rage. They manipulate harder. But the more they scramble, the more obvious their desperation becomes. And to the empath, watching from a place of clarity and strength, the panic is no longer intimidating. It is revealing. It shows, finally and undeniably, that the narcissist was never truly powerful. Their control was always an illusion, one that only worked as long as the empath believed in it. And now, the empath no longer believes. The narcissist's panic is proof of their weakness, proof that the tables have turned, proof that the cycle is breaking. For the empath, it is a moment of liberation. For the narcissist, it is the beginning of the end.
There comes a moment in every empath's journey when the pain reaches its peak. The years of confusion, the endless attempts to understand, the countless nights spent wondering, what did I do wrong? All come together in one breaking point. But this breaking point is not the end. It is the beginning. The empath who once lived in a haze of self-doubt slowly realizes the truth. It was never about their lack, their weakness, or their failure. It was about the narcissist's hunger, a hunger that could never be satisfied, no matter how much love, care, or sacrifice was poured into it. At first, this realization feels like standing on shattered glass. The pain is raw, and the betrayal runs deep. The empath looks back at the countless manipulations, the gaslighting, the silent treatments, the accusations, the shifting of blame, and feels anger boiling where there used to be tears. For so long, the empath played the role of healer, peacekeeper, giver of second chances. For so long, they confused endurance with love. But now the veil has lifted. The empath does not suddenly become hard, cold, or cruel. That is not their nature. Instead, what awakens within them is clarity. They see the game for what it is. They see the narcissist not as a powerful figure holding control, but as a frightened child wearing a mask of superiority. They see how every manipulation is not a display of strength, but a desperate attempt to avoid being exposed for what they truly are, empty. And this changes everything. The empath no longer reacts the way they once did. Where once a silent treatment would send them spiraling into self-blame and frantic attempts to make things right, now it produces only calm. Where once criticism would pierce like a dagger, now it bounces off the armor of self-assurance. Where once triangulation or guilt-tripping would stir up anxiety, now it sparks a knowing smile. This is the transformation, not to become cruel like the narcissist, but to rise above their cruelty. It begins with boundaries. The empath, who once terrified of saying no, begins to say it without apology. They learn that no is not rejection, but protection. They learn that their energy is sacred, and not everyone deserves access to it. The narcissist, who once feasted on endless forgiveness, now finds the door closed. Then comes detachment. The empath, who once poured all of themselves into fixing, healing, and explaining, now understands the futility. They stop handing out explanations to someone who never wanted understanding, only control. They stop seeking closure from someone who thrives on leaving wounds open. Instead, they create closure within themselves. Confidence begins to bloom. The empath, once shrinking in the face of criticism, now stands tall. They see their worth not through the narcissist's eyes, but through their own. They begin to realize, I was never weak. My compassion was never a flaw. My heart was never the problem. My love was simply wasted on someone who could not receive it. And this confidence shakes the narcissist to their core. For without insecurity to feed on, the narcissist starves. Their rage, their manipulation, their endless games lose power. The roles have shifted. Where once the empath danced to the narcissist's tune, now the narcissist is left flailing, unable to control the rhythm. But here is the beauty. The empath's transformation is not about revenge. It is not about giving back the pain that was given to them. No, the transformation is higher than that. The empath chooses strategy over cruelty. They choose wisdom over retaliation. They choose to rise, not sink. The empath learns to conserve their energy for people who give as much as they take. They learn that love should never come at the cost of self-respect. They learn that peace is found not in pleasing everyone, but in walking away from those who will never be pleased. And in this newfound strength, the empath becomes untouchable. Not because they have hardened their heart, but because they have fortified their spirit. They are no longer bait for manipulation. They are no longer prey for emotional predators.
They are no longer chained to the illusions of someone else's control. The narcissist may rage, they may smear, they may try everything in their playbook to pull the empath back into the cycle, but it no longer works. The empath has stepped into a higher place, a place where the games look childish, the lies sound hollow, and the drama feels small. The transformation is complete when the empath no longer seeks validation from the narcissist or from anyone else. They validate themselves, they honor their truth, they cherish their own energy, and they realize that the real power was never in the narcissist's hands. It was always in theirs. This is the victory. Not the victory of destroying someone else, but the victory of reclaiming yourself. Not the victory of becoming hardened, but the victory of becoming wise. Not the victory of revenge, but the victory of peace. The empath's transformation is not just survival, it is rebirth. From victim to warrior. From confusion to clarity, from brokenness to strength. And when the empath finally steps into this truth, something incredible happens. They no longer fear the narcissist. They no longer fear their tactics, their rage, or their abandonment. For they understand deeply and unshakably that nothing the narcissist can do has power over someone who has chosen freedom. The empath smiles, not with arrogance, but with peace. They walk away, not with bitterness, but with wisdom. They rise, not to destroy, but to live fully, freely, and authentically. This is the empath's transformation, and it is the narcissist's greatest defeat.